In this video, I'll be covering 10 tips and tricks for Secrets of Strixhaven Draft to help you find more success in your events. First, finding the open lane is essential. Secrets of Strixhaven is a format built around 5 main color pairs, which means tons of the power level is tied up in these multicolored cards. Cards like Startled Relic Sloth, Colorstorm Stallion, Essence Knit Scholar. Some of the best possible cards that you could get for your deck are these multicolored cards, and if you find the open deck, you can get past these cards much later than you would get similarly powered cards that were monocolored, because a deck that is not playing black-green simply can't really justify putting Essence Knit Scholar into the deck, and so if there are a bunch of black-white drafters at the table, but you're the only black-green drafter, the chances of you getting a card like a late Essence Knit Scholar goes way up, and the same is true for a lot of powerful multicolored cards. Finding the open lane is essential, and so what you really want to do is take strong cards early in packs and don't really let yourself get biased by your picks that you've already taken. So if you start the draft with a strong blue-red card, but you start seeing really strong green-blue cards, definitely be willing to pivot and even stay open longer than you might in other formats, because once you find the open lane, you're going to get tons of powerful cards for your deck really late in packs because other players simply won't be able to play these strong multicolored spells. So stay flexible and reap the rewards. Next, Converge is pretty easy to enable. There is the powerful Potioner's Trove as a 3-mana artifact that can tap for mana of any color. There are lands that tap for multiple colors in this format. There's a lot of mana fixing. So if you see an early card like Snarl Song, which is a Converge card that gets you 2/0/0 green and blue fractal creature tokens with X counters on them, and you gain X life, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast it. If you see a card like Snarl Song early in a pack, you can take this card and be pretty confident that if you draft the mana fixing that you see, which you will see, you'll be able to enable your cards like Snarl Song. Arcane Omens is another great example of this. If you see one of these early, you can be fairly confident that if you are trying to build these multicolored decks, there are the pieces in the format to support that, and you can cast this for 4 or 5 colors fairly consistently if you are building your deck correctly. With that in mind, lands are high picks, not just for these multicolored Converge decks, but also in general, because as I already mentioned, there are lots of these multicolored cards that are very powerful, so it's even more important than normal to take lands like Fields of Strife, lands like Terramorphic Expanse very highly to enable your early drops that might cost red-white to cast, and you really want to have access to both red and white mana on turn 2 as a result. In some formats, you can get away with keeping opening hands more frequently that maybe only have one of your colors and then wait for a few turns to find your second color. In this format, having access to both colors very early is very important. So a card like Fields of Strife, there's one of these multicolored dual lands for each of the 5 color combinations supported in this set. And so Fields of Strife, these sorts of lands, Terramorphic Expanse, this sort of mana fixing is really important to prioritize, even for your 2-color decks, but especially if you're trying to play these Converge decks, because if, for example, you are trying to play a Converge card, a dual land, even if it's only one of the colors in your main color, the fact that you can then sometimes use the off color to help cast Converge spells for extra colors is very, very nice. Additionally, try to splash with one basic. If you are trying to enable splashes, or if you're trying to enable Converge cards in addition to splashes, using a single basic land for the splash is really nice. So for example, if you're splashing red in a blue-green deck, and you have a Studious First Year, a Strixhaven Sky Coach, and a Spectacle Summit, by putting only a single mountain into your deck, you're still going to have 4 sources of red mana, because of the Summit, the Mountain, the Sky Coach can go get your mountain, your Studious First Year can go get your mountain. Minimizing the number of off-color basic lands that are in your deck is really, really important to make sure that you can still consistently cast spells in the early turns while you're waiting to get your mana set up. And so that's a very important aspect of splashing and trying to enable these Converge cards, and just in general, when you're trying to draft these decks, make sure you prioritize the mana fixing very highly to try and be able to set things up to only have to run a single off-color basic land. Next, Witherbloom is an aggro deck, typically black-green decks or more mid-rangey, more grindy, but because the pest tokens in this format reward you by gaining a life when you attack, a lot of the payoffs in this format are built around being able to attack and pressure your opponent. For example, Leech Collector is a life gain payoff, but it rewards you by being able to deal extra damage to your opponent. Pest Mascot is a creature that grows when you're gaining life and has trample. It wants to be getting into the red zone, and having the extra pressure and being able to attack is important. Thornfist Striker, another reward. It buffs up your creatures. It's not providing you a lot of late game value as a reward for this life gain. What it's providing you with is extra stats on board that help you continue to pressure your opponent. So if you build your Witherbloom decks as mid-range or control decks, you will often fall a bit short when other players go over the top of you with converge payoffs and things like that. If you are building your Witherbloom decks as aggressive decks, you can fully maximize your cards. So early on in the draft portion, if you see these cards, definitely keep that in mind and try to build your Witherbloom decks more aggressive, and you'll find more success with them. Next, Prismari Tempo is mostly a trap. Cards like Deluge Virtuoso, which in some formats would be really nice as a tempo tool. A card like Tackle Artist, which can be a fine card to play, but isn't really something you should be building your entire strategy around. And a card like Encouraging Aviator, which is like a flyer that wants to be attacking, wants to be aggressive, wants to give your other creatures flying while casting spells. These sorts of cards aren't the ones you should really be prioritizing for your blue-red decks, because blue-red generally is just best built as a late-game controlling deck. Instead of these cards, looking for cards like Sonar Unfinished Genius, a 0/4 that's not really what you ever want in your aggressive tempo deck, but is just what you want in your control deck. It gets you some advantage. Divergent Equation is a fantastic card in this format, and again, provides this kind of late-game firepower that you're looking for. Tablet of Discovery, this kind of ramp piece that gets you deeper into the game and helps you cast expensive instants and sorceries. This is much more what blue-red is doing. It's not really doing the kind of tempo plan built around like getting a couple of early prowess creatures down and like attacking. There are some cards like that, but those are mostly going to be traps because most of the power level is tied up in these late game cards, which you would much rather be prioritizing. Next, direct damage can punish low life totals. There are many cards in the format that deal a little bit of extra damage. Most noteworthy is probably Tome Blast. If you get down to 2 or 4 life, Tome Blast, Flashback, Tome Blast, deal 4 to your face directly is a way you can lose these games. Heated Argument can also deal 2 damage to an opponent's face. Cost of Brilliance can target opponents to deal 2 damage to them. There are a couple of other ways to deal a couple points of damage directly to your opponents that I didn't highlight here, but I just wanted to mention this because if your opponent makes a suspicious attack, maybe they're attacking with all their creatures and you're going to get to eat a bunch of them, but that would leave you surviving at just 2 life or something like that. Keep these cards in mind, because if you can play around it, keep your life total at even 3 against like some decks, or if you can keep it at 5 instead of 4 to dodge Tome Blast, that can be the difference between winning and losing a game, because the cards that can target face are definitely running around this format and can end games that otherwise feel pretty unlosable. Speaking of which, even late game decks need to end the game, not only because there's these direct damage burn spells, but also because there's some really powerful rares and mythics that are really hard to interact with that can just absolutely take over a game. If you're playing like a control matchup and you feel like you've got everything locked down, your opponent can't possibly win, they can't ever really get a creature to stick in play, you've got tons of removal spells in hand, the game can swing when your opponent just goes Exhibition Tidecaller, play 1 expensive spell, mill you for 10. All of a sudden, you're just going to get decked out. Or they just have Mathemagics, which if they cast this for X is a high enough number, it just ends the game on the spot. If they just spend 12 mana on this, you lose. Oftentimes, if they spend 10 mana on this for X equals 4, you're going to lose those games. They make you draw 16. You only have 15 cards in your deck because it's been a long game. These sorts of one-card combos can just completely swing a matchup. So you want to make sure that if you have a couple creatures in play, you're making sure you chip in every point of damage. You don't miss attacks just because you feel like you've got the game locked up. You make sure once you've turned the corner, you actually take steps to end the game, because these cards can single-handedly end a game where you had complete control. And even the white aggro decks have access to some of these tools. A card like Practiced Offense can turn a board state of even just 2 creatures into a ton of damage by cast it, flashback, give both creatures double strike, put 2 counters on both of them, hit for a bajillion damage. It can really just swing the game with just 1 card. And so even if you feel stable, you need to keep in mind that there are powerful cards running around, in addition to the direct damage we already talked about, that can maybe make the game that feels stable, and even though you've got all the resources you feel you might need. Next, counterspells are key in late game decks. This is partly because of those powerful single individual cards that can take over games. As the main counterspell you'll be looking for in the main set, Brush Off is quite good, but there are bonus sheet counterspells. Disdainful Stroke is definitely one that's worth playing, and even Spell Pierce can be worth playing because some of the most powerful cards that your opponent might be casting are X spells. So even though Spell Pierce tends to fall off in the late game, if your opponent's casting a Divergent Equation, which is that X spell we looked at earlier, it's like X blue, return X instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. If they're casting that for 7 mana, they're just putting as much mana as they can into it for X. Spell Pierce can stay a little bit more relevant with these X spells running around, and just counter spells in general. Really what you are something that you should be looking for in your control decks, so that once you have locked up the game, you can't just lose to one crazy powerful card that your opponent might have. And then the final thing, talking about tricksiness, the commonly played combat tricks in the format. At this point, it's relatively established which ones get played more frequently. This is the list of all of the combat tricks available in the set at common or uncommon, but these are the main ones that actually get played. Interjection, the combat trick that white decks will play if they need a combat trick. A lot of the time they'll have better tools, but if they're doing something tricksy, definitely think of this card. Chase Inspiration, blue decks don't always want this card, but it is the sort of card where if they have a powerful bomb rare to protect, they will sometimes play Chase Inspiration in their deck and then just play their bomb rare and try to hold this up. And so in other situations, then that might mean they have Chase Inspiration. Dissection Practice gets played pretty commonly in black decks. It's very powerful because sometimes it can be a +1/+1 for one combat to win that one, a -1/-1 for another combat to win that one, or like a pseudo removal spell to kill 1/1s, things like that. Masterful Flourish gets played occasionally, similar role to Chase Inspiration of protecting creatures, but it does get played. And then Silverquill Charm is a big one. This is the sort of card you really don't want to get blown out by because it leaves that lasting 2 +1/+1 counters as an advantage. And then Quandrix Charm is super flexible and can be a very nice counter magic spell, in addition to being sometimes a combat trick. That one gets played all the time. That's not to say you shouldn't ever think about the other combat tricks, the ones that don't get as commonly played, but generally, if your opponent does have a combat trick, these are the ones that you should be thinking about primarily when determining what your opponent might have in these tricky combat situations. That's going to do it for this video, though. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, leave #10tips in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed it. Good luck in your next draft, and I'll talk to you next time.